Chapter 11. Daisy returned to the Howells' home just before noon, her cheeks flushed from the crisp autumn air, and her steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. She hadn't meant to stay out so long. The town had pulled her in, its rhythm, its people, its unfamiliar charm. She had wandered past bakeries and bookstores, watched children play in the square, and listened to the hum of a place that didn't know her name. It was strange and wonderful. She was also surprised, amazed, really, that Aunt Eleonora had let her go without a word of caution or a chaperone. Knowing what she knew about Daisy, knowing what Daisy had done, it was unexpected. Back home, such freedom would have been unthinkable. But here, in Silver Springs, it seemed trust was not so easily revoked. As Daisy stepped through the front door, Eleonora appeared from the kitchen, her face lighting up. "There you are, darling," she said warmly. "I was just about to come looking. You must be parched. Come, have a glass of lemonade." Daisy followed her into the sunlit kitchen, the scent of citrus and fresh bread wrapping around her like a shawl. A pitcher of lemonade sat on the counter, sweating gently in the warmth. Eleonora poured a glass and handed it to Daisy with a smile that held no judgment, only welcome. "You like the town?" she asked. Daisy nodded. "It's different," Eleonora chuckled. "That it is." As Daisy sipped her drink, she noticed movement down the hallway. Her father was pacing, his steps sharp and restless. He hadn't seen her yet. His hands were clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. Then, as she glanced through the kitchen window, she saw him. A third man was in the back garden with Reverend Howells. He was younger, much younger than the two older men, but still at least 10 years Daisy's senior, tall and slender, with a bookish air and spectacles perched on his nose. His suit was neat, his posture relaxed, and his eyes danced behind the lenses, curious and bright. He caught sight of Daisy and offered a friendly nod. She nodded back, uncertain. Something about him unsettled her, not in a threatening way, but in the way that made her feel something was about to change. She felt the shift in the air, the quiet tension that hung between the walls. Something big was up, and Daisy wasn't sure she was ready. Chapter 12. Daisy sat at the table, her fingers curled around a second glass that had long been emptied of its content. Eleanor Howe sat opposite her, hands folded, her expression gentle but resolute. "We've been thinking," Eleonora began, her voice low and steady, "and we believe there may be a way forward. Two, in fact." Daisy looked up, her heart thudding. "First," Eleonora continued, "you could stay here. Indefinitely. You and the baby. We have space, and we have love. We don't need the town's approval to live a good life. Our friends trust us. They'll treat you with kindness, with respect. You'll be safe." Daisy's throat tightened. The offer was generous, more than she dared hope for. But before she could speak, Eleonora went on. "There is another option," she said. "One that might offer you a different kind of future. Both you and the baby." Daisy's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Her Uncle William had silently stepped into the room, his presence calm. "Marriage," he said simply. "To a good man, a kind man, someone who understands grace." Daisy gasped, her throat closing up. She glanced from William to Eleonora. Eventually she managed to whisper, "But who?" William exchanged a glance with Eleonora. "A young clergyman. I mentored him years ago. He teaches at the seminary now and leads services once or twice a month. He's thoughtful, gentle, and he's ready to take a wife." Daisy's mind reeled. The idea felt preposterous, impossible. Marriage had never been part of her plan, not after everything, not now. But then she recalled the man in the back garden, the one with the curious eyes and quiet smile. the one who had nodded at her like she was someone worth knowing. She swallowed. Is it him? William nodded. His name is Pete Weston. Daisy stared at her empty glass, the silence stretching between them. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what she wanted. But for the first time, she had options, real ones. And that, she realized, was its own kind of grace. "This Mr. Weston," Daisy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where is he now? Did he leave after seeing me?" Eleonora paused, her hands still around the picture. "No, darling," she said gently. "He's still here." She paused once more. "And it's Dr. Weston, actually. An academic title," she explained kindly. Daisy's eyes widened. "Here? In the house? A doctor?" "He's waiting for us in the study," William replied. "He stayed to speak with your father. He wanted to understand your situation fully before making any decisions." Daisy's heart thudded. "Decisions?" she whispered. Eleanora reached across the table, her touch light on Daisy's wrist. "He's not here to judge you, darling. He's here because he trusts us, and because he asked to meet you." Daisy sat back, stunned. "But why? He doesn't even know me." William smiled faintly. "He knows enough. He knows you've been hurt, that you've been brave, and that you're trying to find your way forward." Daisy looked toward the hallway, where the study door stood slightly ajar. She could hear the low murmur of voices, her father's steady and clipped, Pete Weston's calm and curious. "He didn't leave," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "No," Eleonora said. "He stayed because he wanted to." And somehow, to Daisy, that made all the difference. Chapter 13. The parlor was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional crack of the old floorboards. Daisy sat on the edge of the armchair, her hands folded in her lap, her heart thudding with a rhythm she couldn't quite name. Waiting. Eleonora gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll leave you two to talk. No pressure, darling. We'll be around. We won't leave you." Uncle William nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Moments later, he returned with the stranger, Dr. Pete Weston. Pete stepped into the room with a quiet grace, his posture relaxed, his expression open. He wore a simple navy suit, now slightly rumpled at the elbows, and his spectacles caught the light as he looked at Daisy. "Miss Hargraves," he said with an open smile. "It's good to meet you properly." His eyes reflected light and merriment. Daisy stood, unsure whether to shake his hand or simply acknowledge him. She settled for a nod. "You too." Reverend Howells gave a small smile and slipped out, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Pete gestured to the armchairs. "May I sit down with you?" "Yes, of course," Daisy said, sitting again. He settled opposite her, his hands resting lightly on his knees. For a moment, neither spoke. Daisy studied him. He seemed kind, thoughtful. His eyes were a soft hazel, and his voice carried a quiet steadiness. She could imagine other girls finding him handsome, his gentle features, his calm demeanor, but not her. She had decided she was done with that, with longing, with risk. Pete broke the silence. "I know this is unusual. I didn't come here expecting anything. Reverend Howells told me a little about you, and I wanted to meet you. That's all." Daisy nodded slowly. "It's been a lot," she whispered, uncertain. "Yes, I can imagine," he said. "I too grew up in a small town, similar to Millfield. I've seen how quickly people make judgments, how slow they are to offer grace." She looked at him, surprised. "You're a clergyman." "I am," he said slowly. "But I'm also a man who's made mistakes, and I was offered grace. I've learned that faith isn't just about sermons, it's about how we treat people when they're hurting." Daisy's throat tightened. "Most people don't see it that way." He leaned forward slightly. "But I do." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that allowed thoughts to settle. "I don't know what I want," Daisy admitted. "I'm not sure I even know who I am anymore." Pete Weston nodded, like what she said made perfect sense to him. His eyes found hers, and he gently offered, "Then maybe we start there. Not with decisions, just with conversation." Daisy looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to defend herself. She just felt heard. Daisy sat alone in the parlor long after Pete Weston had gone. The fire had burned low, casting soft shadows across the rug, and the mantel clock ticked on, steady and indifferent to the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She hadn't expected him to be so ordinary. Not dull, but grounded, kind, thoughtful. He hadn't tried to charm her, hadn't offered platitudes or pity. He had simply listened. And when he spoke, it was with the quiet confidence of someone who had known both grace and grief. She appreciated that. But she didn't feel drawn to him, not in the way she once might have, not in the way that had led her here, to this house, to this moment. That part of her, the part that fluttered at a glance, that dreamt in stolen moments, felt distant now, dormant. She had decided she was done with that, with longing, with risk, with the ache of wanting something that could be taken away. And yet, Pete Weston hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't offered a future wrapped in promises. He had simply said, "Let's start with conversation." That, Daisy realized, was the first kindness she'd been offered by a stranger that didn't come with conditions. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Silver Springs was still unfamiliar, still strange, but it also felt safe. And maybe, just maybe, it could be hers. She didn't know what she wanted, not yet, but for the first time, she felt like she had room to figure it out. And that, she thought, was a beginning too. Chapter 14. 2 days passed before Daisy saw Pete Weston again. The Howells had invited him for tea, and though Daisy hadn't asked for the meeting, she hadn't refused it either. Something about their first conversation lingered. His quiet way of listening, the absence of pressure, the simple offer of conversation. This time they met outside. The garden behind the Howells' home was modest but lovely, with winding stone paths and late-blooming roses that clung to the last warmth of autumn. Pete stood near the arbor, hands in his pockets, watching a pair of sparrows flit between branches, deep in thought. Daisy approached slowly, her boots crunching softly over fallen leaves. "Hello again," he said, turning with a smile. "Hello," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. They walked side by side, not touching, not speaking at first. The silence between them was companionable, like two people reading the same book in different chairs. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk again," Pete said eventually. "I wasn't sure either," Daisy admitted. "But I didn't forget what you said." Pete nodded. "Neither did I." They reached the bench beneath the old oak tree and sat. A breeze stirred the branches above, sending a few golden leaves drifting down like confetti. "I don't know what people expect of me anymore," Daisy said, into the silence. "Some days I feel like a cautionary tale. Other days, like a ghost." Pete looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You are neither. You're a person, and you're still becoming." Daisy blinked. "That sounds like something you say in sermons." He chuckled, his eyes dancing. "It probably is, you know. But I mean it too." She studied him again, searching for something she couldn't quite name. There was an ease about him, the way laughter slipped from him without effort, the way he moved as if nothing in the world could weigh him down. His eyes held a brightness, a quiet twinkle that spoke of lightness within. Yet she felt no pull, not the familiar spark she had once known with Philip. What stirred instead was quieter, steadier, a sense that he saw her without judgment, without expectation. Not as a problem to mend, but as a person to understand. And somehow, that felt more exceptional than any charm ever could. "My father's a clergyman too," Daisy said quietly, her voice carrying more than the words themselves. It spoke of a childhood where laughter was scarce, dismissed as frivolous, immoral. Of a home where warmth was measured, where forgiveness and grace were spoken of but rarely lived, where gentle touches and shared mirth were foreign things. Pete looked at her, his own tone softening to match her own. He understood at once, the weight behind her words settling over him like a shadow. After a long silence, he nodded. I know. Just 2 words, but they held everything she hadn't said. He heard it all, the ache beneath her calm, the unspoken longing for something different. I don't want to be saved, Daisy added quietly. I'm not here to save you, Pete replied. I'm here to know you, if you'll let me. Daisy looked out across the garden, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. She didn't know what came next, but for now, this quiet, this honesty was enough. Chapter 15. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the parlor walls. Daisy sat stiffly in the armchair, her hands folded in her lap, as Reverend Hargrave stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the fading light. I'll be leaving in the morning, he said, his voice clipped, almost formal. There's nothing more for me to do here. Daisy nodded, unsure what to say. She had expected this, but the finality of it still stung. Her father turned, his eyes sharp but not entirely unkind. If you had any sense, he said, you'd marry Dr. Weston. That man is a court catch, better than you could ever hope for. Daisy flinched. His words landed like slivers of glass. Not intentionally cruel, perhaps, but it cut nevertheless. If there's to be a wedding, he continued, your Uncle William will perform the ceremony. Let him know. I trust his judgment. He didn't wait for a response. He simply nodded once, as if the matter was settled, and left the room. Daisy sat in silence long after he'd gone. The fire crackled softly, but its warmth didn't reach her. She felt hollow, like a decision had been made around her, without her. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply stared at the empty chair across from her, and wondered if love had ever been part of the equation in what her father felt for daughters. The next morning, Daisy awoke to quiet. The house was still, the sun barely risen. She dressed slowly, her limbs heavy, and stepped into the hallway. Her father was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the absence of his coat from the rack, and the silence where his footsteps used to echo. Daisy stood there for a long moment, the emptiness pressing in. Then Aunt Eleonora appeared from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, a smile soft and full of warmth. Good morning, darling, she said, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Daisy's ear. Come sit, I've made cinnamon buns. Daisy nodded, her throat tight. She followed Eleonora into the kitchen, the scent of sugar and spice wrapping around her like balm. The kitchen was warm with the scent of rising dough and cinnamon. Daisy sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching Aunt Eleonora knead bread with practiced ease. The rhythm of it, the press, fold, turn, was soothing, like a hymn without words. I never thought I'd be here, Daisy said quietly. Not like this. Eleonora glanced up, her eyes kind. Darling, none of us ever do. Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully. Daisy nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the garden shimmered with morning dew. Do you think people really get second chances? She asked, desperate for her aunt to say yes. Eleonora smiled, brushing flour from her hands. I think grace is made of second chances. And third. And fourth. Family isn't just blood. It's who stays when things fall apart. It's who helps you rebuild. Daisy swallowed the lump rising in her throat. I don't know if I deserve that. Oh, Daisy, darling girl, Eleonora said, coming to sit beside her. smelling of cinnamon. Deserving has nothing to do with it. Grace isn't earned, it's given. They sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around them like a shawl. Pete Weston, Daisy said suddenly. He's different. Ileana's eyes twinkled. That he is. He lives on his own just a few blocks from the seminary. Keeps a tidy little house with too many books and not enough curtains. And he can boil an egg, mind you. Daisy smiled faintly. He sounds intimidating, but that he is not, Eleonora countered. He is studious, but he is also easygoing. He's cheerful, thoughtful too. The sort of man who remembers birthdays and brings soup when someone's ill. Daisy looked down at her tea. I don't feel anything romantic, not like before. That's not a flaw, Eleonora said gently. It's wisdom. Romance fades, steadiness stays. Daisy nodded slowly. She didn't know what she wanted yet. But this conversation, this warmth, felt like a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, beginnings were enough.